I have 50 minutes kind of to talk to you about interviewing with product management. I want to kind of get a gauge of the audience, see kind of where you guys are and how I can make this really beneficial for you. So we're going to do a quick poll. If you've never had a product management internship or job experience, put your hand up. Awesome. Okay. And then of those people with your hands up, are you interested in the job, interested in the position? Are you looking to apply for it next summer? Are you trying to transition from something? Just to give me more context as to what is really important to cover, I want to make sure that you guys are getting clear key learnings, and I can help you, and we can have a live Q&A at the end. So like some context, yeah.
Well, I was just gonna say like what you mentioned before. It's kind of like the same thing, kind of transitioning from
Yeah. Okay.
software to mechanical.
Awesome. Okay, so what I'm thinking of covering is going to do a quick PM 101, kind of the 5 W's, what, why, how, who, etc., and then kind of the transition. So because this is a hackathon, I am going to assume a lot of people are from a technical background, so how to transition in particular from software engineering into product management, how to make really good use of your technical skill set, and how to sell that asset. And then from there, we'll kind of talk about PM internships, how to get them, how to interview them, how to make a decision on the offer. And then we can go from how interviews are actually conducted, and then a quick Q&A. So to begin, my name is Caitlin. I was a previous, so I am a CS major at Waterloo. I also have a minor in entrepreneurship and geography and environmental management. Because of Waterloo's curriculum, it requires us to do 6 internships. So I started off in software engineering. I worked at a Toronto startup, and then I worked at Shopify. Following that, I transitioned into product. My first product internship was 8 months at a Singapore startup, and then I later joined Yelp and just finished my internship this summer at LinkedIn. So I kind of transitioned pretty early on. I've done quite a bit of PM work in the internship space. I also used to co-direct Hack the North, and now an advisor. And I work in a little bit in the venture capital space as a startup scout and ambassador for Sequoia. So I'm kind of all over the place. And if you ever want to kind of talk afterwards or get advice, just you can email me afterwards. Let's start with what PM is. By definition, and the little definition really is, product manager is an interdisciplinary role that reaches across and design and kind of product. You are basically the center, and there's this really cliche picture that always comes up where it's just like you're the center of design, business, and technical. And although that's kind of true, it really depends on the product, the company, and what you're working on. So honestly, the origins of PM really originates from a set of responsibilities traditionally by engineers, which is really scoping out the user problems and making critical decisions. But honestly, the PM role kind of evolved because engineers typically optimized for code complexity or efficiency or things that were of their domain expertise and not necessarily user problems. And that's where this position kind of came up. A lot of the solutions that were previously being made were not really addressing the user's goals, problems, and etc. So here's kind of 5 statements that I really think encompasses the PM role based on my work experience. One is you have a lot of responsibility but very little authority. Things like, did your designers miss a deadline? That's kind of responsibility. Did your product fail to meet quarterly goals? That's also your responsibility. As a PM, you're responsible for the success and failure of your project. And to kind of make it worse, product managers rarely have direct organization authority. That means you're not the boss of the designer, and you're not the boss of the engineer. So you can't really force them to do anything. And this is where communication is super important as a PM. It really is about just influence and motivation and understanding kind of your stakeholders, rather than designers, software engineers, business operation managers, marketing, HR, legal, etc. You really have to understand their point of view, why this product would benefit them, and learn how to sell it. So that is a good and bad thing because that means that a lot of PMs come from very different backgrounds, and they have, rather they're like a business oriented or technical oriented, there's a lot of diversity in the space, which is really great for solutions. The next one is, if it needs to get done, it's part of your job. So the whole phrase, but that's not my job, is typically not something that comes out of a PM's mouth. Regardless of whether it falls into the boundaries of your written job description or not, you're responsible for doing it if it needs to be get done for the success of your team or project. So rather that's updating the Jira board, that's writing the spec doc, that's emailing designers to let them know that the mocks are not necessarily going to look like how they design it, or deciding what feature is going to get cut with engineers. It's kind of that whole spectrum of responsibilities are part of your job, which makes it a very open-ended and kind of confusing. And that's why PM is typically very hard to define, because it's very different at every company, every team, even at every different level of product. The next one is you are the middleman or the middlewoman, which means you kind of need to come down to translating the needs, the perspectives, the skill sets of all your stakeholders, but also your customers, your users. You need to find a balance and you need to find alignment, which is really hard. I think a lot of people, when they're transitioning into PM, try to have alignment at 100%. And I think that's nearly impossible. You're never going to make everyone happy, and your job is to get everyone to that 60 or 80% mark. That's them being okay with this compromise, getting all your stakeholders okay with this compromise and happy. And that's your job, right? You can't just optimize for designers, or you can't optimize for engineers, because you're either going to end up with a really great design, but something that will take months to build, or a really bare bones MVP that can't even be shipped. The next one is you're not actually building the product. So one of the biggest things about PM is it's a thankless job. When something fails, it's your fault. But when something is successful, it's the team's success. It's their celebration, because you weren't a part of the actual implementation, right? You might have had help with like the idea, but that's when you got designers to create, your idea. You gave the mocks to the engineers that built it out. You worked with data scientists to validate your experience, and that's really important. If you are someone that gains motivation through validation, this job might be very difficult to transition to, because a lot of the credit goes to the different stakeholders, because they are the ones implementing it. So the last one is you can't wait around until someone tells you what to do. And this is where it's really important to have ownership and take initiative. I kind of learned on my first day as a product manager that it's very rare that you'll be ever given clear expectations on what the role is. So while larger companies will have more well-defined set of responsibilities, these companies will still need you to figure out what to do. So let's say that the job description will say, let's say, ideate and brainstorm and bring together solutions for this X product. From there, you have to figure out which stakeholders are involved, how to coordinate meetings, when are your deadlines, etc. There's a lot of underlying interpretation and initiative that kind of encompasses these roles. And I think that's with most jobs, but especially as a PM, you really have to go out of your way and over-communicate, because a lot of the times people will kind of forget, or they have other things kind of on their mind, and people are always fighting kind of for their time, especially engineers. So the next question then is, what do product managers exactly do? What does a day-to-day look like? What can I expect at a PM internship or a full-time position? So I say the easiest way to explain it is that they define the what, the why, and the when of a product, which translates into tasks such as setting a product vision, defining a product strategy, developing a roadmap that meets both the company's goals and the user's needs. This means in a realistic time that uses a reduced amount of, resources, and then also meets what the user is looking for. And then, like I mentioned earlier, people often say that product managers are the intersection of a company's business, design, and engineering teams, because you're going to be working with all these people, and that's why communication is extremely important. Not only that, but you have to be able to properly articulate your thoughts really quickly and be able to think of solutions that are able to be adaptive for compromises, because people will always want you to change your solution, and you have to prioritize who's more important and what is the ultimate goal and what you're optimizing for. So this kind of talks about it. A lot of the important things here is you really need to be able to work with others. it's a lot easier to work with people that like you or that you like, because then you're not dreading those interactions. Then they're more willing to help you, and that's where work relationships are really important. So this is a roadmap. This is the product kind of life cycle rather. And these are all the kind of points that you will be involved in as a PM. So it starts at ideation, which is when you kind of brainstorm what the feature of the product is going to be. Then you go into technical specifications. So it's really important to get engineering involved as soon as possible because they're going to be the ones implementing it. And what that means is that if you want to build out this really robust idea and engineering can't do it, you're going to have to start from scratch. So it's really important to make sure you have fair and early stakeholder involvement. Next goes the roadmap. So this is where basically you lay out a timeline that matches both the user goals and the business needs. So let's say this is a quarter project. You have to release it by this date because it's an enterprise product, which is very common at big companies. You have one date that you have to meet and you can't miss it. So based on that time, what can engineers do and how can we prioritize which parts and features of the product is important? The next one is actually execution. So last one, engineers actually get involved. When you start to get MVPs, when you start to get the betas and alpha releases, and this is really important because this is when QA starts. So again, very important to get involved with your stakeholders as soon as possible. Next is experimental cohorts. So most times at bigger companies, they're not going to put a feature that you ideated at like 100%. That doesn't make sense because we're not sure how it's going to affect the experience, the metrics, etc. So this is when we put them in experiments, and that basically means for a treatment. So let's say that 5% of the users are going to see one experience, and 5% is going to see the other. And that's called an A/B test. And then you can have more different cohorts, which is A/B tests. And it's really important because these tests to be significant, they had to hit a stat sig, and that's calculated based on your product's metrics, so the growth, the exposure, etc. So after that, you have all this data, and then now you can analyze it. You can see, was this feature that you ideated and that you hypothesized was going to change and improve the user experience, did it actually do it? And if it did, then you're going to move forward with user feedback. You're going to introduce it to your beta testers, you're going to get more feedback and reiterate, and then you're going to make the recommendation to actually implement it. Let's say that on the analytics you found out it actually made things worse. It dropped metrics, which happens all the time. Then you're going to go back all the way to execution or the tech specs, and you're going to have to fix what you think went wrong and where it did. And you reiterate and you go back and forth and back and forth. So this is kind of an overview of what you're going to be involved in. Typically, a lot of PMs spend a lot of time in the ideation and the analytics. So getting to the point of validating a hypothesis and then looking at the data and understanding why it didn't or why it did meet the hypothesis. It's kind of like a biology science report where you have the purpose, the hypothesis, you know the tools, all of that. You have to kind of spec out the behavior and what you anticipate. So the next thing I want to talk about is kind of the transition. So I'm a CS major, and again, because of the nature of going to Waterloo, I've had done 6 internships. My first 2 internships were in software engineering. So one was in iOS development, and the other one was in backend. And then I kind of transitioned to product. There's numerous ways to transition. One of the most common ways are when you're typically in first or second year. There's a lot of PM jobs that actually are more product or that are more project coordination. So there's a big difference between product management and product coordination, and also program management. These are 3 different jobs that often get confused with one another. Product management, oh yeah.
So you said there's a product manager, and would it be project manager? Would that be the same?
So there's product manager, which what most people have a good understanding of. There's project manager, and then there's program manager. So there's 3 different types. A lot of companies call it differently, and then the role is also different. So a lot of my friends in first and second year, they typically start in product management through a project manager position, and that really deals with coordination. That deals with a lot of administration stuff. That's basically a scrum master, if you know what that means. So they update the tier boards, very similar to a technical program manager, which is another thing that's also available if you want to stay on the technical side of it. So the whole PM kind of org is very robust. There's a lot of opportunities. It can be curated. I'm going to be focusing on product management, which really focuses on the ideation of products and being involved in the strategic decisions. So here are some really, I guess, important characteristics in my opinion that made it very easy or easier to transition and to have a competitive edge. One of the biggest things is being able to take the initiative, and that has to be shown on your resume. Understand that recruiters are spending less than a minute looking at your resume, and you need to kind of sell yourself in that time. So do you have initiative? Have you gone out of your way to do something, like launch a programming contest on campus? Like, have you done something that was not required of your time? Was it not a part of a class? Was it not a part of something that you had to do? Another one is leadership. Have you taken steps to lead or manage anything? Something like this could be taking a presidential role of a club or organization. The second one is analytical and data set skills. So this is really important for companies that prioritize technical PMs. Some companies will only consider you if you're technical, and some will only consider you if you have an MBA. So it's really important to understand the different companies that you're going for and making sure that you actually meet their requirements or their preferences, because then you're just going to be wasting time sending resumes, right? So off the bat, for example, let me think. Lyft is one that will only screen technical PMs, whereas Amazon, they only take MBA candidates for their PMs. And just understanding that and doing your due diligence and company research is very important, because then you can optimize which company you best fit. Fourth one is product design skills and company focus. So not necessarily designing, but being able to articulate solutions and being able to break down a big problem into small manageable chunks. It's really important to be able to focus on having a very delightful experience, being able to envision something, being able to maybe mock something up really quickly on like Figma or Photoshop or something that kind of gets your idea across. And then some extra ones are, well, the last one is strong work ethic. Honestly, as a PM, you're doing a lot of tedious work. You're doing work that typically people don't want to do, and a lot of that is maintenance and updating and over communication. So you're constantly in meetings for the majority of your day, and when you're not in meetings, you're kind of updating or you're doing communication both in person or kind of online. So you're sending emails, you're updating, again, the spec docs, you're creating alignment, you're thinking of solutions. Things to show work ethic is kind of maybe a good GPA. That's fine. If you're not good at school, you can go on to having a bunch of projects. And so let's say you create an app, putting that onto like an app store. That shows really strong work ethic, seeing something through from start to finish. Another one is, one of my friends actually listed that he completed 62 miles of a 100-mile marathon after getting injured on the 30th mile. And that really impressed the recruiter. So you can literally sell yourself however you see fit. It's just finding that niche and finding what is kind of special about you, what is unique about you, and kind of putting that on your resume to get a recruiter to stop. Your intention basically is when someone is screening your resume, you want them to either have a question or to be impressed. Because then they spend more than they have on any other candidate on your resume. That's what you're optimizing for. Extra things are business knowledge. So I interned at LinkedIn this past summer. They really appreciate when you can talk about go-to-market strategy, when you can talk about business models, revenue, when you can optimize for things like that, because that is the nature of their company. Other things are technical skills. So if you're software engineering, selling that you can talk to engineers. Because by far the biggest issue that PMs have is selling their vision to engineers. Because at the end of the day, if an engineer thinks their idea is stupid or they don't want to build it, they're not going to do it. And that's the crazy part. Engineers actually have a lot of power at tech companies. And that's why alignment and influence is really important. And the last one is strategic planning ability. So not only can you plan the solution, but can you see what the consequences are and how can you optimize that? Can you lead a technical team? Can you create product roadmaps? Can you see the bigger feature and also execute on that vision? And so these are kind of the things that you want to optimize for on your resume, even though you don't have PM experience. Like, I know a ton of people that will get PM interviews if you have these clear things on your resume. So how can you do it? Like, how can I start the transition? The first thing is expressing your interest. If you're at an internship right now that offers PM interviews, the easiest way to transition is internally. So a lot of my friends have worked at, for example, Google Suite, and they reached out to the recruiter, and then they transitioned into the APM program. By far, doing internal transfers is one of the easier ways to do it, especially if you're already at a big tech company. But let's say you're not interviewing at a big tech company. All right, that's fine. Pick up PM-related tasks as an engineer. Impress your team. Your team might not necessarily have PM internships open, but maybe they're willing to create one for you because you're that great of an intern or an engineer. Show interest. And then the last one is also just build a product. Show recruiters or show the people that are screening your resumes that you have the ability to start something from start to finish. Rather that is an app, rather that is a club, rather that is like a side project, like a hackathon project, right? Show that maybe you didn't get something working during this weekend, but you continued it for the next few weeks and you put it on, live. You got a bunch of users. Just show as many ability to do the involvements of that, again, the roadmap in your resume, and that's kind of how you get attention. This kind of talks about how to interview. So I've done a bunch of interviews, and these are kind of the consistent things that have come up. So the first thing tends to be an application or a referral. I by far would always recommend you to get a referral from a company. So honestly, just ask for help. A lot of people are more than willing to help you because they've been in that position, and referrals really get your foot in the door. So if you know that one person that's working there, or if you're friends with that one person, honestly, just ask them. Even if you don't get the offer, it's not going to look bad on them. And if you do, you give them a referral bonus. So they're more than happy to do it. But I have gotten a lot of interviews by just plain out cold applications. So it's not like a lost cause, but do start early. So for context, if you are looking for a summer internship, applications are already open for summer internships 2019, especially for PM. Full-time interviews are almost done at this point for next summer. So PM starts really early because it follows the American academic calendar. It doesn't follow Waterloo's. So a lot of the time, people will have jobs in for next summer by November, and that's why it's really important to, have Google alerts on career pages that you're really interested in, or to stay in contact with recruiters so that they can bump you when an application is open. So the next thing is usually a phone screen. A phone screen is either going to be with a recruiter or it's going to be with a PM. And they basically kind of talk to you about, they basically give you a background check and then also a cultural fit. Because the nature of the PM job is so reliant on communication and your soft skills, it's really important that you actually meet the company's culture and that they see people at the company want to work with you. And that's why a lot of companies are now optimizing for the cultural fit. So the cultural fit is basically a lot of behavioral questions like, why this company? Why product management? If you were in this situation, what would you do? After that, you might be given a homework assignment. And homework assignments can happen before or after the phone screens. So it can be like a product pitch, which basically is Yelp's homework, where it's just like they give you 5 different scenarios and you have to optimize the experience at one of them. So it's like, how can I optimize Yelp ads? And you write either a slide deck or you write a 2-page kind of solution. Another one is like a product analysis. So LinkedIn's was an essay on what I would build on LinkedIn that doesn't already exist. And you kind of go through the whole product cycle. You talk about how you ideated, you talk about where the problem is and why your solution is it. You talk about how you would implement it, what are the technical implications, how would you check for success, what metrics would you track, etc. You go through that entire thing in 2 pages. And again, that is why communication is so important. To be able to sell all of that in about 500 words is very difficult. And then this comes the hard part. That was actually just kind of getting your foot in the door, and then now is the phone screens. Typically you'll have 2 or 3 45-minute phone screens that test anywhere from this. Some companies will tell you what they're particularly looking for, others won't, and they'll just say, we're just giving you like a normal PM interview. So some of the questions that will come up, and I'll give you examples for some of them, are behavioral. So these are the ones that I mentioned before. Tell me about yourself. What's your life what's your life story, which is Shopify's one. And then they also ask about your work authorization. The next one is estimation. So estimation is basically questions like, how much revenue do you think YouTube Red makes in a year? Or estimate how much Google costs for, how much Gmail costs for Google per user per year. And you're thinking, how am I ever going to know that? So the intentions with estimation questions are not for you to know the answer, but for you to be able to break that down into an equation that makes sense. So for these questions, it's important to have general knowledge. Things like the US population, or how the population is split into demographics, or just some knowledge of like the tech space. Even if you're completely wrong, because I have been before, I've estimated a lot of these things. I had a question where, how many planes do you think fly into San Francisco airport every day? And my equation was the hours of operations times the number of gates. I think times like the times it takes to like gate, and like my numbers were way off. But the fact that I was able to develop that equation showed that I could actually get to a solution, right? So estimation questions can be completely off, but you just need to have that logical equation. And honestly, the only way to improve is just experience and mock interviews. Mock like crazy, think about problems. Like, the only way that I've really gotten to where I have is just owning my critical thinking. Whenever I see an experience, I'm always just like, why? Why? Trying to understand why someone designed something and how we can make it better. And you just have to practice that over and over again. The next is product design, which is one that most people know about. Product design are like the ridiculous questions like, how would you design a fridge for the blind? Or develop the customer journey map for Expedia. So either it's either like breaking down a current product and how it actually accomplished its goals, or designing some ridiculous solution. So companies like Microsoft really appreciate creative solutions. Their question, I think last year, was, how would you implement a smart windshield without distracting people, right? And honestly, like there's no, the nature of these questions, understand that there's no right answer, ever. So part of the PM interview is a balance of hard work and also luck. And there's a lot of control. There's a lot of factors out of your control, so don't kick yourself if you don't get it, because honestly, it's a very subjective and luck-based interview process. The next one is go-to-market strategy. So that's kind of the business side, where it's just like, should Google build a Comcast TV-like service? Or tell me what you think Amazon should, like who Amazon should acquire next. So understanding your domain expertise and your understanding knowledge of the company, its business, its values, its mission, and the space it's in, and its competitors. And that's why I think it's really important to optimize for 2 to 3 companies that you really want to work for, and then do a bunch of research on it so you have a good understanding of where they are, what they want to hear, and things like that. And then the last 2 are less important. They don't appear in all of them, but they're metrics and technical. By metrics, I mean, let's say there's an 8% drop on Uber, like last week. Tell me why. And that was actually the Uber question, where you're trying to break down why something happened. So you ask for clarifications. You try to understand the space. Was it a holiday? Was there a blackout period? Did the app crash? Was like you think of different outliers and edge cases, and you kind of find a solution that you think you would go towards. And the last one is technical. Most PM interviews for internships will not ask technical questions, or if they do, it's either algo questions or very simple like whiteboarding, basically. So things like Yelp's a few years ago was, how would you join 3 tables in SQL? And they didn't even want me to answer it and write like correct syntax. They just asked me how I would do it, like how I do the mapping. So if you're technical, this is not something to stress out on. For full-time, they will usually make you whiteboard. So for Google, for example, they make you whiteboard a solution of like, I think it was like a string manipulation or like a string, some sort of string database question. So those are kind of the questions. And then sometimes for internships, they will ask for an on-site. So for example, Lyft and Asana, for their PM internships that only happen in the summer, they fly you out. For other companies like LinkedIn or Yelp or any other Toronto companies, they usually don't do on-sites. And you could kind of prove yourself through those screens. Awesome. That was a lot of information. Do you guys have any questions? Okay. I can kind of finish off it. So this is actually from a resource that I used to prepare, and this is from Louis Lin. He wrote Decoding Conquer, and it was really helpful. And he kind of wrote down what each company prioritized. So for example, Google, like most companies really want you to be able to have strong product design skills, and that's just because you need to be able to break down a problem. But you'll see that they typically differ a little bit. So Microsoft, has very low emphasis on metrics. They don't really care. Whereabouts Google, Facebook, and Amazon, they want you to understand metrics and be able to interpret it, right? So this is what I mean by doing a due diligence and understanding if you actually meet that ideal candidate. And if you don't, that's okay. You can improve. Or you can look at other companies, right? Big companies are great to start your careers at, but they're typically very hard to really make your name for yourself because there's a lot of people and the nature of your responsibilities is a lot smaller. But they're great for foundational PM experience, and that's why I do recommend having that experience. So resources. These are the ones that I would recommend that I've either read myself personally or friends have recommended. So it's a classic cracking the PM interview. So if you didn't know that existed, it did. Same author. Louis Lin's Decoding Conquer. That really helps with product design and estimation, in my opinion. There's also the PM guidebook, which gives you context on what the nature of a PM role is at every different company. It's just a book of just interviews. And then also things like understanding SWOT analysis, frameworks like IDEO's design thinking is a big one, the big picture, scammer. Eventually when you start prepping for PM interviews, you'll start understanding. A lot of people use methods, and methods are basically how to approach questions. So one is called circles. And circles is an approach that you can use towards product design questions. Each letter refers to something. I don't remember it currently, but circles basically breaks down where it's like clarify assumptions, identify the problem, it's like figure out the persona, and then you think about solutions, you prioritize the solutions, and then you summarize. I can't remember it right now. But then there's also ARAM and then DIGs, and those are good for estimation and metrics. And then if you need advice, these are the companies that I've personally interviewed with and kind of worked or been offered at. I think if you want to see like what most of these companies here, I believe, offer PM internships, but they're all in the summer. So one thing to note is like the best time to do PM is during the summer because you have the most options. Like again, with Honolulu Works, we do have the ability to work at Microsoft or Yelp in the fall and the winter, where I would definitely recommend you to try to do your PM internship during the summer, whether that's your last co-op or your next co-op. That's when there's the most opportunities, that's when there's the most, like the bigger classes and things like that. And some companies will not give you it otherwise. So for context, let me see. Braintree's only in the summer. Facebook doesn't do a PM internship. Google's only in the summer. Lyft's only in the summer. Mozilla's only in the summer. Asana's only in the summer. LinkedIn's only in the summer. PayPal's only in the summer. Roblox, Twitter, and Zynga. Oh no, not Zynga. Zynga is actually year-round. But you'll see that this list comes like the list of opportunities for PM is already very small if you've actually done research on it. So optimize for a summer term. Even if you have to change streams, really you'll have more options, you'll have more interviews, you'll have more offers. And yeah, if you have any questions after this, you can email me or Facebook me. I'm more than happy to help. How are we good for time? Oh, we have a bunch of time left. So I don't know if you have any questions, if you wanted me to clarify anything. I'm happy to help. Yeah.
So I'm guessing for you, most of your experience for product management has been more on the software side instead of like say the
Yes.
hardware side.
So,
Does it differ a lot if it's hardware that you're managing?
yeah, so I've typically stayed on the front-facing consumer end of products, which I really like because the dev cycle is a lot faster. I got some exposure to enterprise products when I was at LinkedIn, and they launch like every quarter, which is really slow, and I would not want to deal with that. Like, as a product manager, especially for an internship, you want to work on something that you can actually ship in that 10, 12, 16-week period. Or basically, you didn't do anything. On resume, if you don't actually have metrics to share, your PM internship is not very valuable, to be brutally honest. And that's why it's important to ship something and to be able to analyze that if it made a shift or anything. Sure, you can say you ideated, sure, you can say you implemented something, but at the end of the day, it's the impact that you left at that company. So I have a lot of knowledge in consumers. With hardware, as a PM, I know Apple has one, and I know Microsoft does too. And the nature of their job is a little bit different, and I think it's closer to a TPM, which is Technical Program Manager, which is a lot of more the scrum mastering, the staying on the technical side, the updating the boards, contacting the engineers and things like that. So I can't unfortunately speak on that. Yeah?
This is a PM interview question, and I was wondering if you can kind of...
Yeah, let's do it. Let's break it down, yeah.
What would you do if you built a product feature that your consumers don't like?
What would I do if I built out a product feature that my consumers do not like? All right, so the first thing that you want to do with this question is clarify any assumptions. You want to figure out what do I know yet and what are my constraints. So I would ask you, when did I launch this? Is it at 100% public? Is it to consumers? Is it to enterprise? Who has access to it and who doesn't like it? Right. Okay, so let's say you say it's, let's do the worst case scenario. Let's say it's public and that there's a big drop in our activities or our weekly active users last week because we think it's because the only product that we launched was this. Okay, so from there, I'd be like, okay, if this is the siloed situation, let's understand why. So I would compare the two different experiences where what changed. Because you want to make sure when you're doing experiments that you're isolating a single change. Previously, I worked on a project that combined a bunch of different changes or a bunch of different instances in one single experience. So even though this experience improved better, we didn't know why it improved better. Was it because of the copy changed? Was it because the design changed? Was it because of the layout, the time that the email sent, right? So it's really important when you do cohorts, where it's just you isolate each different change in a different variable. So let's say that's what happened. It went down because we mixed a bunch of different changes in it. So from there, what I would do before cutting the feature, because when you cut a feature, you're basically throwing away everyone's time. And that's very detrimental for a team's morale. As a PM, you are kind of the person that bridges the different teams, so it's really important that you're excited for the feature. They're excited for the feature. So imagine it's just oh yeah, the feature failed and we kind of stopped working on it. No engineer will want to work with you ever again. So after that, I would be like, okay, we're going to test it again. We're going to rerun this experiment. Well, we're going to run an experiment and isolate the different changes and see from there and reiterate and evaluate the situation. Obviously, the interviewer is going to make it more harder on me and give me more hiccups, but that's kind of how I'd approach it. Yeah.
So then something more specific to that example, are you familiar with Reddit's new redesign?
Reddit's new redesign? I'm not. Reddit is actually one of the better experiences for threading and nesting. So I actually have not seen it.
Well, basically they redesigned the site a while back and they've had a limited beta kind of thing. They've been expanding on the users, but more people are starting to not like it.
Yeah.
So in that kind of situation, what do you use? It's the old Reddit site is still up, right? So it's you can see what the traffic is.
Yeah. So that sounds like there is a misalignment in user goals and business kind of goals. And that happens a lot. When a company needs to make money, they need to optimize for what it is. So let's say this new experience basically shows you more ads, which means they earn more money. So sometimes companies will move forward at the expense of their users. Because if they know that their heavy users will adapt to it, they'll just move forward with it. So it's just like, you'll see, like, especially as a PM, and when you start interviewing and start doing the nature of these jobs, you'll realize how shitty some experiences are on like products, and yet we still use it. Like one of my favorite websites is Goodreads. Goodreads is a terrible UI if you've never used it. I like Goodreads because of their algorithm and because of the social aspect. But oh my god, if I ever need to go to a book, I have to do 3 clicks. Like, why is the user frustration, right? So, but I still use it because I'm a heavy user. So it's also understanding that as a PM. Awesome. So if you guys don't have any questions, thank you for dropping by. Yeah, let me know. Hopefully this was helpful. Awesome. Have a great rest of the weekend.